Welcome, it's Karen Jacobsen here. Very pleased to welcome you all here today to our Refugees in Towns Symposium on Race and Migration. It's great to have you all here, and I'm just going to make a few opening remarks. My name is Karen Jacobsen, and I'm the Henry J. Leir Professor of Migration at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. And I'm also the head and founder of the Refugees in Towns project. And we're delighted to have our symposium today on race and migration. Let me say a few words about the goals of the symposium. Last year, we began some research with the Hello Neighbor Network, which is a resettlement network of agencies across the United States that helps people resettle, that helps refugees resettle. And Hello Neighbor approached us, the Refugees in Towns project, to have us work with them on exploring some issues around the intersection of race and migration in the United States. And so we've been working on this project for the past year, doing some research about it, working with Hello Neighbor. And we wanted to present some of those findings today and then talk about what we're going to do with this research and how we can use it to help refugees resettle and to help agencies help those refugees be resettled in the US. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Refugees in Towns project. This began in 2017 when after the Trump presidency began, there were many extremely problematic issues that arose around resettlement of refugees in the US. And we began this project to explore how different towns are responding to resettlement of refugees and to migration to the US in general. So we began with that project focusing on individual towns, initially across the US, but then across the rest of the world too. And since then, we've done many cases that explore how refugees are resettled into towns, how they are become integrated or not in towns. And these cases are gathered on our website, which you're welcome to explore, of course. But so this past year, Hello Neighbor came to us, and I'm delighted to introduce later on, we'll be introduced to our partners there, Rachel Vinciguerra, and who's the representative from the Hello Neighbor network, and also Jeri Stroade, who's one of the Hello Neighbors regional agencies based in Mobile in Alabama. So Rachel came to us and asked whether we could work with them to explore a problem that they'd identified in the US, which was that refugees coming to the US, being resettled in the US, didn't seem to really understand some of the issues around race relations in the US. They had come with preconceptions about race that had often been developed during their journeys, sometimes in their stays in refugee camps or in other countries. And when they came to the US, there were some issues around how they understood issues of race relations and how they understood the issue of race itself in the US. So this was a very complicated issue with many intersectionality issues that are involved. And we weren't very sure how to explore it. And so it really was, and our initial efforts to understand some of these issues as researchers and as people who are advocates for refugees, and how we could work with resettlement agencies like Hello Neighbor to take these issues forward and try to understand better what was going on. So we began with research literature review, and then we conducted some research in the two towns where Hello Neighbor, two of the towns where Hello Neighbor works. One is Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, and the other one is Mobile in Alabama. And then based on that exploratory research, we've expanded to a couple of other cities, including Utica in New York. And so based on that research, we then tried to figure out, well, how can we use this research to help communities and to help resettlement agencies. What can we do with this research to make it useful? So some of those issues we're going to explore in our symposium today. And we're very excited about some of these findings and about talking to you and to other resettlement agencies about it. And that's what we're going to do today. So before we move on, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Our research was sponsored and funded by the Tisch College, the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And it was also, some of it was also paid for by Hello Neighbor Network. And research, the Refugees in Towns project, is based and has been also supported by the Henry J. Leir Institute for Migration and Human Security at the Fletcher School. And so finally, I'd like to just really thank and acknowledge the organizers of this symposium, who really did it completely by themselves, supported by Jacob Ewing, who's our project manager at the Leir Institute and a longstanding supporter and worker on the Refugees in Towns project. Jacob is invaluable to us. But the organizers of this event were Charlie Williams, who you'll hear from in a minute, Lucy Mastelar, Yumika Kawahara, Nikki Matty, and Dominique Ramasawak. And these wonderful Fletcher students have put together this symposium today, and I'm just thrilled with it. I'm very happy to welcome you all. And I'm now going to hand it over to Charlie, who'll tell us about what's to come. Go ahead, Charlie.
Hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you for that information, Professor Jacobsen. Just looking forward for our schedule for today. I wanted to inform everyone. First, we're going to begin with a spotlight with our research partners that Professor Jacobsen did mention, Rachel and Jeri from Hello Neighbor and Dwell, who will dive into more of the motivations to explore this topic with us today. And then from there, we're going to hear from migrants' reactions to our research and provide a space for them to share their own experiences and dive deeper into this topic that we are discussing today. We'll take a brief break for lunch, so keep that in mind as we move forward on Zoom and then also in person. After lunch, Tufts professor, Dr. Helen Morrow, will present her research on new destinations, dreaming, immigration, race, and legal status in the rural American South. And then finally, we're going to finish with conversations with practitioners reflecting on this research findings and discuss how racism manifests in their work, how they're actively participating with communities to discuss these topics, and propose ways to implement racially equitable policy and programming within their communities across the United States and the Boston area as well, and then conclude with some closing remarks. We're very excited to be here with you all today. And with that, we're going to move into our spotlight process with Rachel and Jeri. Let's welcome Rachel and Jeri into the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. We are very fortunate to get to work with Charlie and Yumika both over the summer here in Pittsburgh. So it's great to be here with all of you today. And Jeri and I will present a bit from our perspective as the nonprofit partners in this study and the work, and our role in commissioning the study as the Hello Neighbor Network. I think my slides are visible here. Okay, so my name is Rachel. I'm the Director of National Programs for the Hello Neighbor Network. The Hello Neighbor Network is one program of Hello Neighbor. Hello Neighbor is based here where I'm calling in from in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we, in addition to resettlement work, also have ongoing programming for families and individuals who've come to Pittsburgh as new neighbors. One of Hello Neighbor's programs is the network, and the network convenes other nonprofits around the U.S. working with refugees and immigrants. And these are all grassroots organizations. They're not resettlement agencies, so they're working with folks, the 90 days and later after they've arrived here in the U.S. And over the years, since the network was founded in 2019, it's grown from 8 nonprofits and their leaders across 8 states to 63 nonprofits across 26 states around the U.S. and Dwell Mobile, and you'll hear from Jeri in a moment, was one of the founding 8 members. So they've been a long time member of the network. In the first year that we started the network, we did a study to understand a little more about why grassroots nonprofits are so important in their communities at combating polarization and increasing inclusiveness, especially. So we did surveys and interviews with both refugees and with host communities and volunteers who were working with those individuals. And what we found is unsurprising to anyone who works in nonprofit or in communities like this. We saw that when refugee families were involved in small grassroots nonprofits like this, they were much more likely and more frequently sharing meals with members of the host community. And they were also feeling that they had a greater sense of belonging in their city and in their community. And then on the other side, we saw for volunteers who were engaged, they were more likely to advocate for refugees and immigrants at the local, state, and national level. And we also saw that their social circles became much more diverse. And so we know that grassroots organizations like those in the network are really at an important point and positioning for newly arrived families. And we also know that these types of organizations are often under-resourced, although we are pretty close to the communities that we work with. Jeri and I, in particular, wanted to position ourselves within this study. So as we were thinking about doing this project, which I'll explain in just a moment, there are sort of 3 groups that we felt it's really important to make sure that their voices are at the table throughout. So there are practitioners, that's nonprofit folks like Jeri and I, experts with lived experience, whatever migration journey that looks like, refugee or any other legal or other process of coming to the US, and then researchers. And we've got this represented as a Venn diagram, of course, because folks can represent, 2 or all 3 of these groups. Jeri and I represent practitioners. Neither of us do have lived experience, so it really was very important for us to have community advocates involved in this process. And you'll hear from both Stroade and Moses on a panel coming up, and then the researchers, of course. And so those are the 3 main groups. And throughout future research, we think all 3 are really important to be a part of studies like this. As Dr. Jacobsen mentioned at the beginning, we were interested in this study because we were having conversations here in Pittsburgh with families who had resettled, and we were hearing that other network members in their cities across the US were having similar conversations, hearing similar comments. And so we started to investigate what sort of resources were out there to understand this topic better. So what we were hearing is that our refugee and immigrant neighbors are experiencing racism. Some of them, there's no monolithic experience, but we heard that from some. From some, we were hearing and seeing folks repeat, especially anti-Black racist comments. And we also saw during the Black Lives Matter movement that some of the families that we work with were, confused, disoriented, and unsure of what was going on and what their place was in it, and really unfamiliar with the history of race and especially anti-Black racism in the US. And when we looked to see what resources and research existed, we couldn't find anything. And so we wanted to connect with some academic partners who could support this work. And we're grateful that we were able to partner with Tufts and the Refugees in Towns program for the qualitative case studies, and then with UMass Amherst on a national survey. And through both of those processes, there were 2 other literature reviews conducted, and there just is not a lot of research available on this topic. And I will keep it on this slide so Jeri can explain a bit about how she got involved in the study.
Sure. So my name is Jeri Stroade. I'm the director of Dwell Mobile in Mobile, Alabama. And I got involved in the study because through Rachel and Hello Neighbor Network, they put out the opportunity to host a researcher or two to conduct case studies. And a lot of the same things that she had mentioned, they were having some conversations with their new neighbors, and we were not having those conversations down here during the Black Lives Matter movement. However, Mobile, the history of the city Mobile has a tumultuous relationship with race, I would say. The city leaders maintain that there is one Mobile and no real problems with race and racism here, yet Mobile is the site of the last recorded lynching in the US in 1981. And so I have always noticed that as just an interesting juxtaposition of things. And I was curious about how that would obviously impact somebody who is rebuilding their life here. And so I felt like this study gave me a chance to understand some of that more.
We wanted to share a little bit about what we've learned about doing this research, and we've learned a lot throughout the process. The case studies were a really great opportunity to get deep with two cities that have very different contexts. And so I definitely, if you haven't read them, encourage everyone to read through the case studies that the RIT team put together. They're really well done. There were still limitations to those studies and the survey as well, because of a number of reasons, including the fact that we, had to really focus on folks who had higher levels of English proficiency. Also working with nonprofits like us, the group of folks that you're working with is a particular group that has reached out or interacted with a grassroots community organization. We also had some challenges with getting representative samples, both for the survey and the case studies. Transportation, language, interpretation were all important pieces of that. And so as we're thinking about what nonprofit academic partnerships look like in the future, those are all things that are really important to us. And we've had a lot of great conversations with the RIT team as well about these topics. And then I think a really important point to make that I think anyone who's done a partnership like this will be familiar with is that for nonprofit staff, there's very limited capacity. We have a lot of interest and commitment to be involved in studies like this, but usually not a lot of time and staff capacity. So it's really important for us to be able to work with capable research partners like the team at RIT, who are being really thoughtful about the design and the approach, and research partners who have like those over intersections rather that I was showing at the beginning.
So I will take the future research part. As with any research, when you start it, you understand why people spend their careers doing research, because there's always more research you can do. And so there was a few things that after this study was done, we thought it just brought up other areas where research in the future would be necessary, and wanted to highlight some of those. The first one would be that we need more understanding about how refugees learn about race and racism in the US. And I want to highlight here, especially related to young people. This study was only adults and a small scale study. And so a larger, more representative study, including youth, would be beneficial. And then the next thing would be to develop materials to support those who are working with refugees, and honestly, refugees themselves at the micro level, to help people who are working with refugees, like practitioners, as Rachel was talking about, develop a framework for an understanding of how refugees experience race in the US and how they've experienced it in their home countries. And then the macro level like we need to understand both of those things. Again, how have refugees experienced and what were they taught about race prior to their arrival in the US? And one thing under that is, what race-related information does their pre-arrival training include? And is this study seems to suggest, which you guys will learn or hear more about that later, but there's some insufficiencies in those trainings. But this is a small study. Do those insufficiencies exist systemically, or do they not? And then the other thing is, this is kind of thinking large scale, but how can we influence those trainings to provide more information that will, and skills that will better prepare people who are coming as refugees to the US to start their lives here? And then, thank you, Rachel. We have potential implications for nonprofits. So what are, as Rachel was talking about, the practitioners and the people with lived experience and the people in academia. So what are potential implications for us as practitioners and nonprofits? And as I mentioned, we need some training and education for people working with refugees in how to help our clients and our new neighbors and support them as they start their lives in all areas, but especially related to how do they deal with racism that they may experience here. And then this would be, for us, it'd be doing post-arrival equipping. If the pre-arrival training is insufficient, what can we do post-arrival to help equip the people who we're working with to rebuild their lives? And again, this is especially important for youth. Youth are the ones experiencing more violence. They're experiencing more violence online. They're experiencing more and more bullying at school. And are they equipped to deal with those things? And often their parents aren't equipped to deal with those things, either because they don't expect it, or they haven't been sufficiently educated about race or racism in the US either. And so often the people who we're building relationships with and our new neighbors, like, we're the ones who we have a special place that we could be taking to equip them. Are we doing that? And then, and I would say, just in this all, Rachel and I talked about this, but just the relationship building aspect of our work is very important, and difficult conversations, like, have those conversations. And those are a good place to start. I think those can have a much wider impact than we maybe expect. And conversely, if we don't have those conversations or we don't build those relationships, we're sort of cut off at the knees at what we're trying to do, and our ability to really affect change could be severely diminished in that. And then the last thing would be, what have we learned about, as Rachel was talking about, what have we learned about nonprofit academic partnerships in this? And I think there's important things to consider in that. And I think going forward, and as Rachel discussed too, we will prioritize partnerships with institutions that desire to invest in our organization and on our communities in a way that's mutually beneficial. And often also, as Rachel mentioned, there's costs associated with doing research, and both for everybody involved, there's costs. Nonprofits, as Rachel mentioned, do operate on a very thin margin often. And so an increase in cost for a project can really affect a nonprofit's ability to effectively still do their own work and help with the project. And so an example would be, if there's a change in the project that increases the cost to the nonprofit, an institution could help offset those costs in a way by contributing additional resources in a way that shows that the institution values the resources the nonprofit is giving to the project. And so that would be an example there. And then again, as Rachel said at the beginning, we all have important voices in these projects and this research. And we all are viewing from a little different perspective, I think. And so in the same way that academic institutions and nonprofits each have the voice, it's important that the people with lived experience also have a voice, because their voices really need to be included, as do all of us, but theirs really need to be included, because that's the only way we're really going to be able to understand what we're trying to understand here and develop a fuller picture of what we want to learn. And hopefully, what we get out of projects would be impacted and, again, like biased, or not, I guess biased isn't the right word, but if those voices are not included. And so those are some of the things that we wanted to bring up in that.
Great. And I'll just wrap us up here. I know we're about a minute over, but I want to really thank Lucy, Maka, and Charlie, who were all in our cities and with our nonprofits, and that they took a lot of time to volunteer and get into the community and get to know us and think about how they could also support the nonprofit throughout this process. And that was really crucial. And I also want to point out just a few resources we have, and thank both Sarah Morehouse and Alex Demand for helping to get some of these resources together. So if you go to the Hello Neighbor Network website, we now have infographics available that summarize some of these findings in both English and also Dari and Karen. And we have brochures that are available if you want to print those out and share those with any community members, as well as a research brief and then the case studies that you're familiar with. And we really are grateful to our sponsors as well, who made the research funding possible on our side. And we'd love to keep the conversation going with all of you. I know today we'll be live tweeting with the hashtag Race and Migration. And then, as I mentioned, you can scan these QR codes or find online any of those resources that I mentioned. Let's stop sharing here. Okay, yeah, thanks everyone.